As we now turn to Joshua 6 verses 1 to 24, I hope that you have your Bibles open as we study the story we've all been waiting for. The Battle of Jericho is, of course, one of the great tales of the Bible, one many of us have known from childhood, yet by now we may expect a few surprises from the author. Indeed, familiarity may perhaps blind us to the rather peculiar way the story is told. Indeed, most of the chapter seems occupied with rather secondary and background material. Nevertheless, there can be little doubt of the challenge Israel faced, as verse 1 emphasizes. Jericho was a frontier town, a key Canaanite city and a powerful fortress. It was probably regarded as impregnable, especially now it was bolted and barred. But this was to leave the Lord out of account, and that is always a hazardous business. Despite Jericho's king and mighty men, the Lord's work was as good as done and dusted. Note the "I have delivered," which stresses it is his work, and from his perspective can be spoken of in the past tense. Meanwhile, however, it did not appear like it. Moreover, the Lord proceeded to give the most bizarre instructions to Joshua in verses 2 to 5. But then God's sense is not always common sense. The next part of the story is interesting. Joshua passes on an expanded version of the Lord's instructions, but it's far from clear that he explained to the people what they could expect, nor that they would be required to repeat the process. However, in the circumstances, it's difficult not to admire the people. Day after day, the people silently go about this strange and apparently purposeless ritual. While it might have been faintly disquieting to the inhabitants of Jericho, the impact of the journey is more likely to have discouraged the Israelites. Quite apart from the words of scorn that doubtless echoed from the walls of Jericho, there would also have been the rather unpleasant items that besieged people tend to throw over the walls at passing pedestrians. Above all, the sheer folly to overcome a well-equipped and defended city by a group of nomads who could only stretch to ram's horns must have become apparent and drawn barbed comments. On the seventh day, this must have appeared even more so, as time and again the people traipsed around the walls, despite Joshua's now cheering words. But before we read what happened, we need to note the rather strange way the story's been told. Verses 6 to 13 describe the first day, then everything speeds up and the 5 further days are dismissed in a single verse. Then, just when we expect the denouement, the author records another speech, another of his delaying tactics. Yet that's surely the point. For the author, these verses are the most important in the chapter. Joshua wants to emphasize that the outcome of the battle is certain, and it's later described with the utmost matter-of-fact brevity in verse 20. However, if Jericho is not taken, it will not be the Lord's failure, but the absence of humble trust in the people and faithful obedience to his instructions. And surely this is the point that is re-emphasized in the final verses, which interweave the sacking and defeat of Jericho with the deliverance of Rahab and her family. For this story is a triumph not simply of Joshua or the people's faith, but of hers too. But it was not Joshua who fit the battle of Jericho, as the old spiritual says. The author rejects such a man-centered theology. It was the Lord whose victory was witnessed by a people of faith. And such a God was to be feared among all those who came in contact with him or his servants, as verse 27 shows. Finally, since this was the Lord's battle, the spoils were his. The people must wait for their turn. Meanwhile, the site of Jericho was symbolically cursed. It was to become a permanent reminder, and another one of Joshua's pilgrim sites, of the faith of all those who depart from a covenant relationship with God.